day, everyone. Welcome to CX Excellence Chats with Anjali, the podcast that's all about transforming your business through the power of customer experience. I'm your host, a CX consultant with a passion for customers and constantly finding novel ways to relate customer experience with business success. In each episode of this podcast, we dive into the strategies and insights that can potentially help businesses achieve their objectives, albeit with a customer lens. Our guest today is a very unique lady, a global CX thought leader all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. Her name is Mandisa Makubalo. Mandisa, welcome.
Like I said earlier on in our in our second conversation, thank you for having me. I'm really, really excited. I'm looking forward to learning from you and also sharing my own perspective and insights with the rest of the world and your audience.
Thank you so much for making the time and joining us. I know we're in different time zones, but we made it work.
It actually
so,
works for me. It's almost 2 in the afternoon, so it works for me.
yeah. So, let me first start with giving a little introduction. Mandisa, as I said, is a customer experience management strategic consultant and engages with brands and businesses in South Africa as well as other parts of the world, sharing her knowledge and her expertise in building customer centric organizations and cultures. Mandisa, would you like to add a few words in terms of just an introduction to who you are and the kind of work that you've been doing?
So, like you said, I'm Mandisa. My name is Makubalo. I'm based in the beautiful city of Cape Town in South Africa. I am a strategic management consultant by profession, specifically in the spaces in the discipline of customer experience management. I've been doing this work for the past 7 years. I actually realized this year that it was 7 years. So it's been 7 years in the game. Before that, I've always been in customer environments. The last position I held was a head of services for a management consultancy in the waste management space. So I've been in the petrochemical space, I've been in the FMCG space, I've been in financial services, I've been in telecommunications, both locally and internationally, and I've been in the higher education space as well. So really the heart for customers has been there. The transition to move from corporate into being an independent consultant wasn't that difficult. What I do like about the work that I do right now is that it doesn't only apply to large corporates, and to medium-sized corporates, but I do a lot of work with small businesses and entrepreneurs in South Africa, educating about customer experience management and using that as a way to drive economic development and to also drive growth for small businesses, to see them transitioning from being just entrepreneurs to getting into a space to being, your medium-sized company and eventually scaling into a large corporate.
Interesting. So we will talk more about that as to how you're using customer centricity to actually drive growth for organizations. A very, very interesting conversation, I'm sure. But before that, let me introduce the theme for today's conversation. And the theme, as we agreed, is change management in organizations to become more customer centric. With your varied experiences across so many industries, you have brought about change and transformation, and we're going to delve a lot more into understanding how you've done that. In your words, you said 97% businesses desire to be customer centric, and at the same time, 97% businesses fail to be customer centric. Isn't that so ironical?
Mm.
Your philosophy, very much like mine, is that business success is fueled by great CX. And key metrics that define business success, like revenue, market share, profitability, etc., are all linked to it. However, not many people believe in that. Often we come across people who remark that, CX is just a good to have rather than a must have, because they are unable to see how, it can lead to that kind of growth. What would be your remark to that?
I'll speak from a South African context. I've had a series of conversations recently with C-level executives from some of our large corporates just to have a sense and understand really what's their thoughts about CX. Is it really true that the business leaders inside corporations are struggling with getting budget approvals? Is that really what's happening? We hear this all the time that I'm not getting the approval, I'm getting pushed back. They don't understand what CX is about. And the interesting perspective that came from those conversations is that the issue isn't really around CX and whether or not there's a budget for CX, but it's about how it's positioned. And I remember one conversation I had with a C-level executive. It was in the financial services sector, and that the whole sector is highly customer facing, very transactional in nature. In South Africa, we have the top five the big banks, and are really competing on CX. And the one thing that came from him is that, Mandisa, the struggle is that we get told all the time, start understanding your customers, spend more time understanding your customers, spend more money on getting to understand your customers' needs, take care of your customers. And his response was, sometimes that is quite patronizing to hear that, because we are in the business of customers. We are here for customers. We wouldn't be making all these investments if we did not understand our customers, if we didn't care about them, if there was no relationship between us and our customers. So when you hear someone saying that sales is about understanding customers, getting to know them more, we're doing that. Simplify it for me, because whatever I do as a person that sits in the top level executive of a large bank, with a footprint across South Africa, sometimes also internationally, you know what we talk about. How do we optimize, operations? How do we drive success? How do we achieve our objectives? How do we improve performance? That's the language we speak about. So help us understand what are the complexities in the organization that we can then start to solve in a way that allows us to achieve these objectives. You telling me that I need to understand my customers, spend more time with customers, I need to get to know them more. It doesn't really say anything to me. And that's why it's almost like this bottleneck between the C-level executive and CX. It's that connection has not been understood, and it's not clearly articulated by those who have been given the responsibility of handling the CX, portfolio. They're not able to make that connection for top level executives to be able to make those informed decisions. So I mean, that's the first thing I will talk about, which I fully agree with, because we both see on LinkedIn, we see on Instagram, we see on social media, on YouTube. It's about you get to know your customers, understand. It's quite vague. It really doesn't say anything. Will you be able to narrow that down? When you say understand your customers, narrow that down into perhaps a business process, into perhaps
Yeah.
a business function, for me to be able to understand what you are saying. But as long as you're telling me that understand your customers, get to spend time with them more, we're doing that as a business. But if it's not working, what part of that is not working? That when we fix that part, it's going to allow us to achieve our objectives. It's going to allow us to improve our performance and ultimately achieve success as a business. That's ultimately what we need to get.
I totally agree. It's less about, whether CX is able to do that or not, but in the way that it is being done and articulated and implemented, that determines whether you can make that connection. And if we just do it
Yes.
right, probably there will be more believers of the fact that it actually does create ROI. And then probably,
Yes.
as you said, not that many issues in terms of saying, can our CX folks fight for their budgets and get them? Um,
Yes.
so, since a large part of your body of work is around organization culture, and building more customer focused organizations, could you share, say, a couple of examples of, organizations where you were actually able to do this and could actually show that linkage to real say financial metrics or true your metrics that people called success, because just listening to customers and getting voice, okay, so how's it really adding up? So how have you actually created some sort of a change where you were able to do that linkage and create those results? Could you share some example like that?
So in South Africa, there's one of the companies that is in the petrochemical space where they really had a challenge around when COVID had started. So the whole transition of moving people from the office to working from home, and not understanding what that looks like and what it meant from a culture perspective. They actually recognize that it's gonna cause a culture shift because now people are working from home and some at work, but it's not gonna be all hands on deck in the office space. So what does that mean from a culture perspective? And where do we even begin as an organization? And what helped with that particular project was that the organization had already reached that maturity of embracing the importance of culture. They had been able to see, the importance of culture from a revenue perspective and what it does for them as a brand. So going into that kind of organization, it actually makes it easy to drive change and to define change and to be able to implement and measure change. But on the latter side, if an organization has not embraced the importance of culture, and has not been able to see the results of embracing culture, then it's a different conversation because then you have to start by really beginning to understand where are they at in terms of culture. What's the thinking around the organization? Now, with that kind of organization, you need to start by bringing outside perspective or organization to run a survey to really understand the temperature across the organization as far as culture is concerned. And that will allow you to see where do we begin and what do we start with? Where are we at as an organization? You know, are we even ready right now? Because if you find out from the survey that people aren't happy, the company is not ready for that kind of transformation, it means that you're gonna have to put everything on hold and address those issues before you can really begin a cultural transformation program. But for this particular organization in the petrochemical space, because they were already there, it was already a culture in the organization, it was easy for us to really identify the fact that now that we're transitioning from working from the office and then shifting from home, what does that mean? Who are our people? Because some people, uh, they own their homes, they live in very well established areas, and some people come from very poor backgrounds. They live in a home with 10 to 12 people. So you need to be cognizant of all of those things when you are going to be driving culture as an organization. And because their culture was so well defined and well communicated, it was easy to try and to align what was happening at the time to their existing culture. Because there are more of the company has a clan culture. So the clan culture is more family oriented.
Okay.
We are concerned about everything to do with you as Mandisa, and not just you as an employee. But if you're a single mom, you've got a child in high school, you're in this position, you live in this area, they concerned about you holistically. So it was kind of easy to try and create a process that will shift people from that way of working to working from home whilst keeping that same culture. Because if you are transitioning from working from the office and you are moving to working at home, then because we are a company with a culture that's very homely, it's easy to transition people from the office to a home setup with that kind of culture. So we again started off with just running the temperature check to understand where they're at, the anxieties about COVID, what do they know about COVID, what were they expecting, who is able to work from home, who are able to work from home due to maybe infrastructure being poor. All of that encompassed that whole process. And
Yeah.
the key thing again was transparency. We kept on communicating. Before we even started off, there was a whole massive launch of this culture program. and educating people what it's about and what the desired outcome was going to be, and that
Mm,
they've got an outside company to assist them. But I think the key recipe to our success was being able to work very closely with the client, and not come into that space pretending to know everything, because that's one thing we do. We come into that space and pretend to know everything. But if you are able to leverage whatever resource the company has internally, you're able to do a much better job and achieve better results. And
mm,
being able to separate your responsibilities to say, you will be responsible for this, you are responsible for that. And some are shared responsibilities. You also have to do that as well. We have to
mm,
share some responsibilities. So it's really about taking everything on board and trying to come out with a very big, payout from the project. It's really about focusing on value and letting the value speak for itself. So we worked with a couple of stakeholders internally and from our own team. I had to bring people from outside our own company to come into the whole project. We had people from a medical background,
mm,
psychologists, because we can't deal with the psychological issues that come as
sure,
a result of that kind of change. But we had to
sure.
be clear in terms of how do we map out the stakeholders and who are these critical stakeholders together with an organization. But in mapping out those stakeholders for the culture change to be done, we had to be cognizant of the company's values and what culture they are building, so that whatever we bring from a skill perspective is able to allow them to achieve the desired
Mm,
outcome. And it was quite collaborative in nature. I'll say very collaborative. Although we were program managing and leading the entire program, but we had identified a lot of skills within the organization and outside to be able to make that project work. And
mm,
we were able to deliver the best results for the organization, that they did not feel the impact of COVID-19 as a result of building those teams together, and having a steering committee that runs the project from a senior perspective, and those smaller teams on the ground that were
mm,
responsible for certain things. But the insights from the research we done initially were critical in making the process very well informed and very streamlined. I think that's the greatest ingredient to the whole recipe, being able to take insights and using the voice of the employee to drive the process.
you've touched upon so many things in this little conversation. You've talked about, post COVID, people moving to a mix of person and in-person, hybrid, remote environments. You've talked about, culture literally as a factor of the kind of environment that's been created and how that can either perpetuate or transform
Mhm.
depending on the needs. But you also talked about very interesting things like values. You talked about transparency. You
Yes.
talked about accountability. And you talked about human behavior, which is the most dynamic and difficult aspect probably to handle. And one of the reservations we've heard people say when it comes to culture is that it's slow to change, because whilst all people believe that change is wonderful, and yes, I put my hands up
Mhm.
and yes, we will change, but it's probably one of the most difficult things to do, because getting people to change behaviors, mindsets is not that easy a task. You talked about
Yeah.
even bringing in psychologists, but what people usually believe is that such change is slow and takes a while, and therefore results also take that much time. So in your experience, usually how long should do programs like this take to show some sort of an impact on the company environment, as well as some of the metrics which you hold as measures for success for a program like this? And do people have the patience to wait out that time?
My response to your question would be, remember I mentioned there's two types of companies. Predominantly, you
Yeah,
find these two types of companies. Companies who are already aware and are
yeah.
embracing the importance of culture. And some organizations don't even have a clue, what culture is about. And it's something they've heard, it's something they're excited about. And what you will find is, in the one organization where culture is embraced and it's always been there, and they've seen the results previously, and they're able to measure the success of a culture change program. There's not much pressure from them in seeing the results immediately.
Okay.
So for them, it's really not about can we measure tomorrow and see something on our bottom line tomorrow.
It's
It's
not
not
possible.
about that. Yes, it's because they've already been in that space, and for them, it's really about our people, and our entire ecosystem, because it doesn't only affect your people inside, but imagine if you're in a petrochemical company, you are
Mm,
running with multiple stakeholders, massive supply chains and value chains. So whatever happens from a culture perspective, it affects your entire ecosystem. So
yeah,
depending on the nature and the size of the operation, a company would really, such a company understood that it won't happen overnight.
yeah,
But we've been able to see, and we are more concerned about our people. But
yeah,
because we know that when we have concern for our people, we are able to see the efficiencies in our operations. We are able to see from a revenue perspective, our customers are happy. We are keeping, we are keeping our customers. There's massive customer retention. There's employee satisfaction that we see. They are more happy at work, their families are more happier. So you can see all of those things. But for a company that has not really grasped culture management and the importance of culture in business, you will find there's always pressure to achieve results today. We want to see
yeah,
something tomorrow. Mandisa,
mm,
put it on paper. What are we going to see in the next 6 months? Are we going to see 20% increase in profit margins? Are we going to see 10? It's more about what are we getting out of this,
yeah,
which is equally important, but that's not
yeah,
your first concern, really. And also because you are working with people, we all know that as people that anything new, it's gonna take some time. Sorry, it doesn't happen overnight. So those two scenarios where there's already a culture in place, but there's a recognition that we need to do something different. So there you'll find that it's much more relaxed. Yes, there's conversations about revenue and how we're going to measure success and all of those things, but it's not really what occupies the conversations. So
yeah,
I would say within a period of between 6 to 12 months, like with this
yeah.
particular company, we had run our first post implementation survey 12 months later, just to
I
assess 12 months down the line, just to assess where they were at, compare those results with the first set of results, because you got to have something to compare against. So we used,
yeah,
right when we were celebrating 1 year of the implementation, then there was a survey launched to say, and people appreciated that because sometimes there's this whole massive investment made on culture
mm,
change, but there's no
mm,
follow through. And people feel that they are being used, they're being abandoned, it's false promises. Then you end
mm,
up blaming an independent consultant saying that you have not delivered, but you're not
mm.
following through. And people are very cognizant of that.
Yeah, I think it's important to have that long mid to long term vision and the patience to see it
Yes.
to actually reap the benefits. So tell me one more thing, do people really embrace this kind of change, the people in the organization? I mean, so for instance, many a times we've seen in organizations functional leaders have their own agenda, right, their own set of priorities, and usually sometimes these priorities may or may not marry across departments, and so therefore how does the organization really create, breaking down of these silos and more collaboration between them to have a common set of objectives, especially for your customers? So how does that work, and do really people come out and embrace this and change some of these behaviors?
The only way you're going to see that level of collaboration across the organization and get to
Mm,
see people actually embracing that. What we had done, and it's something I recommended to a colleague of mine when she was approached to run a massive project for a company in the UAE, similar project as well. So the approach
mm,
that we took in terms of managing the process is We can't run away from this. Organizations are broken down into different functions for reasons that we all know, and that by virtue of that kind of structure, it does already drive silos, but there's a way in which you can get away from it as an organization. But we can't run away that there always be a marketing area and HR and legal area and risk for reasons that we all know to drive, certain focuses within the business and to keep things, running as a well-oiled machine. So what we had done is we initially had a conversation with the expo team, and we also surveyed to understand from them where they were at in terms of culture, because we can't be running a survey for the people and not one for the executive team who is responsible for leading and driving the change. As much as they're not involved in managing the change, but from a leadership perspective, we had to understand that. And then we looked at the team that's just below the executive team. We looked at the steering committee. So we had different surveys running for the different levels of seniority to the bottom ones. And then what we had done, we then had other workshops running and focus groups where we had combined teams. So we had people from marketing, from HR, from sales, from product in those focus groups, for us to be able to see how they're engaging together and what's their perspective around change. So we knew that from an HR perspective, this is where they were at in terms of culture. A marketing team is what culture means to them. And that information was critical in the success of the project. And then we combined the teams together to see what kind of results do we get out of this when the teams are mixed together. And there were conflicting perspectives that came. As much of the questioning was the same, but when we had focus groups, listening to them and asking questions, the body language and the engagement told us a different story, but what you saw on paper was completely different. That kind of, variety in terms of insights was very important. And then we used all of that information in the way that it came to be able to start an understanding where do we begin and how do we address the gaps that were emerging out of those series of conversations and qualitative and quantitative research. So that really helped. But we had to also not mix teams according to departments. We mixed them according to departments, but we also mixed them according to level
Yeah.
of seniority. So you had your first line with the operations, with executives, in one space, and we used that combination to be really creative around and innovative around what can be done.
Interesting, interesting. So, yes, when change like this happens, there are always people who sit on the border, people that probably are even in doubt who are outside that line. But it's a few things you've said. Top management buy-in and behavior when it really has to be driven from the top. You've also
Yes.
talked about cross-functional collaboration and cross-functional teams doing similar work, which then
Yes.
gets people to see unified views and say, we are not talking different languages. We are doing the same thing because that's in the benefit of our customer and in the benefit of our company. And so that kind of brings us together. And you obviously said that, communication and
Yes.
transparency and engagement, I think, is so critical to ride out all of these doubts, etc., and get people to come along on this path. So, well said, well said. Thank you so much for that.
And if I
Um,
can add, another thing that we did, which was quite creative, was that as part of our team, we had internal representatives. So we had people from the front line, heads of department, quite senior, that were part of our team. And we gave them responsibilities and functions throughout the project, and they were compensated because those people were the champions across the organization, and that really, really helped us.
yep. So that reminds me of a program that I had done on culture, and we created this team which we call the cat team. And we said, "Who the cats?" And cats actually was also a cool term, but actually meant it was a
Yes,
culture action team. So cat was
yes,
culture action team, and somehow we started with a very small team, and then everyone recruited more cats, and that's how we
yes. I love
team
that.
more and more people sort of following the force till almost everybody had joined in. Obviously, as you said, it
Yes,
took months and months of process, but yes, people have to buy into that new philosophy and really embrace it
yes,
and see the benefits of it. And then you actually go out and communicate, see what we did and how it added value. And we put up some of those stories of the customers. And I think those are things that
yes.
kind of
That's fantastic. Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful. So that brings me to another question. Since you have done so much work with call centers, and those are huge ecosystems, right? Large number of people, very, very diverse set of people as well, from the agents to technology to, so many things that are interplaying. But one thing that has always been at the conversation for call centers is that they're all cost centers. Somehow,
Mm,
sexy, but yeah, call centers are
mm,
cost centers,
yes.
and there has been this huge new line of thinking saying that doesn't necessarily need to be it, especially in today's consumer driven world. And therefore making investments in the call center will only happen if people start to see them as revenue drivers. Are you starting to see that change, and if so, how is that change happening?
I love the fact that you asked me that question because before my last position, I was in the petrochemical space and I was appointed as a value added services manager. So the head of the contact center knew that she was running a contact center, but in a space that's quite commercial. So it wasn't a
Hmm.
stand-alone contact center. It was in this massive ecosystem, and it every time I appeared like this reluctantly funded space of the business. We always used to use those words that it's one of those reluctant. So we'll find the contact center, but there's a reluctance when it comes to that decision. So she then had this heart to position the contact center as a value-added services space and not a cost center. And also I was tasked with that responsibility of making that happen, that we are seen across the entire operation as a value-added services space. And that was in 2010 till
Oh,
2012. So
wow.
already that transition was taking place at that time. I
Yeah.
can tell you that. So I'd spent a lot of time in Malaysia because 30% of the ownership of the company sits with the company out in Malaysia. So I'd spent time on that side to understand what was happening. I spent a lot of time with the different stakeholders within the organization that we somehow were connected to. So I spent time with the commercial team, the retail team that manages all the forecourts across South Africa, the commercial team that manages the commercial accounts. I spent time with the supply chain team to understand supply and demand. I spent time with the sales team. I spent time with key account managers. I spent a lot of time with each and every division in the organization that we had a touch point with to get to know, to understand their business. And then came back and said, this is what they are focusing on. I'd spent time just saying, is the one thing, or if I came to you right now as Santa, Santa Claus, and I had a goodie bag, what would you like to see in that goodie bag? The top three things. What is currently keeping you awake at night right now with what we do in the contact center space that would save you, allow you to achieve your objectives? What are your objectives actually? What are you held accountable for in the organization? What are your deliverables? And that approach really was welcomed in such a way that those same divisions allowed me to attend their management committee meetings. I was introduced to stakeholders across South Africa where I would drive and spend time with the stakeholders to understand what are their challenges, what can be better. So it was really from a place of learning from the outside and bringing that in, and not
Yeah.
an inside out approach, which is what you predominantly see with most contact centers, that it's always us and the outside world. But now to add value, you have to start building relationships and understanding what matters to them and how can you add value to what matters to them. So that was in 2012 already.
Wow.
where there was an awareness that we have to shift from being this cost space with high staff turnover and being a more value added services space. But I had to sit down and ask myself, what does that look like? What is value for them? And it worked. I promise it worked. I didn't spend a lot of time at my desk. I was in between these divisions. I was traveling around, coming back to my teams, working with my
Mm,
managers to say, this is what we need to achieve, where are we doing this, how can we make change? And I slowly introduced them as well to the different divisions within the company where there's more value, and we achieved great results, I can tell you. And the company started to bring more, I wouldn't say more work, but more business into the contact center. We became more trusted as a space. And there was this whole transition about the face of the contact center within the entire business. There was more mention about the contact center in
mm,
organizational wide conversations. There was
mm.
recognition and respect for the contact center because of that.
Yep. So I think the biggest transformation is the transformation of the mindset and belief
Mm.
system to say, and you're saying that was as long back as 2012. But I think
Wow.
a lot of organizations today are facing that question as well to say, can we transform our ecosystem? I know a lot of organizations that have transformed some processes, some verticals within the contact center,
Yes.
and mostly outbound processes, which are more sales led, say, for instance, cross sell, upsell opportunities,
Mm.
retention opportunities, and so on. And they try and create some sort of revenue metrics for that to say, can that offset the cost? But yes, there are larger ways to achieve success, but the primary and fundamental factor is really for people to believe that
And
it
if I
is
can add, I mean, there was a lot of barriers throughout the process. Some
uh,
people were not interested.
mm,
Mandisa, you just came in here. I've been in this company for 20 years. Things are never going to change. And I had to cut through all of that. So it wasn't an easy transition, and a
sure.
road that was smooth. But it was, I could see, as long as I could get one person on board, that for me was enough. And the fact that I've got the heads and the leaders on board, that was enough. It's easy to manage everything else, but I also had to respect where those people, the naysayers, were coming from. It was understandable. And also from my team, there was excitement that right now we are recognized and we are valued. But initially, it was like, man, it's like you're wasting your time. It's always been like this. They're not going to respect you. You don't know much. But when they saw the resilience and the consistency, that I had displayed, they could see the results that I was not breaking down.
Right. And when I was kind of doing my research and I read a few things that you had written about, one of the conversations that struck me was something that you'd written about you being a woman and therefore a more effective change leader. Talk about that. It's interesting, but does really being a woman in business help build a strength?
Mm.
Especially when it comes to transformation about people management, that is probably the toughest and the most challenging aspect of business.
Yes.
But how are you able to cope with that, and how do you believe your gender works to your advantage, if at all?
I wrote that as a mom, and it might be different to someone who doesn't have kids. But I wrote that from me being a mom and
Mm,
and you know and being a breadwinner at home and running this ecosystem at home, that really helped me in business. I would be quite honest. Raising a daughter who's now 26, just 26, and living with a mom who's now 85. And my brother at that time was still very young. He's now 40. He's just a few years younger than I am. That really taught me, managing as much as it's people, but you are responsible for different functions in the home, and
mm,
there's Mandisa in business, there's Mandisa personally, there's Mandisa mom, there's Mandisa daughter, there's Mandisa sister, there's Mandisa, a community member. It's a lot. It's really a lot. But when I sat down, I think on the day I had an interview with Maiden Guardian, the newspaper, and that's where the article was at. I really, when I was explaining that to the reporter, there was this deep conviction in me because I realized that actually being a single mom has helped me a lot, especially now in business. I've learned so many things, and I remember saying to her that the one thing that I've learned to do, and I share this all the time with my colleagues, I'm very open with my daughter. I say to her, you've got, it's me and you in this world. You've got me,
Mm,
I've got you. I'm still growing. I'm still trying to figure out who I am. I'm your mom. I'm a partner. I'm running a business. I've got colleagues. There's your granny who wants me to be a daughter to her. It's a lot. So I'm growing, you're still growing, but you can grow together. And I'm gonna make some mistakes. You're gonna make some mistakes. Let's cut each
mm,
other some slack. I still haven't figured out who I am completely. Though I'm there, but not 100%. I don't think we get to a point where we really figure out who we are. But it's something that we grow on a daily basis. It's like an onion. Every day there's a layer that opens up, that opens up, that even surprises you. Like at 47, I'm like, I didn't realize that at the age of 47, I'll be discovering this about myself. But it does happen. So I can say that running a home has really taught me so much about running a business and working with people as well.
yeah, yeah. Maybe some other factors like, maybe being more empathetic, I don't know, maybe
Yes, definitely.
woman. Yeah. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
having
So,
that intuition that always says to you, that's not right. Stop,
yes.
don't move. And that resilience, and that heart for people, being able to make decisions, firm decisions, but in an empathetic way. It's also a key strength that you can separate people from how they behave. You can
Mm,
still address the behavior, but also not, destroy the person. And not
mm,
everybody can do that.
mm,
Mm.
hmm. Interesting. It does help. So, we're getting to the end, but I will not complete this before asking you one anecdotal question because I know you have very strong views on um, AI, because AI is such a hot topic in our world today, and from everything from it's taking away jobs to it transforming the way we work to making so many new things possible. Today AI is that magic thing which can just do so much for us, right? And we're also
Mm.
talking so much about how AI can transform CX in so many different ways, be it conversations,
Yes.
be it personalization, in the organization context, even in HR functions. There's so many ways we can deploy it. But there's also a very strong view, and I know you hold that view about how AI, usage of AI is also a little bit risky. And
Mm.
how is that view playing out? And I think it'd be interesting to share with the viewers what you think.
So I have very strong opinions about HR, and I hold them very dear and close. I'm even prepared to sit in a dialogue about AI. So here's the thing. I posted something one day that says that artificial intelligence is exactly what it is, artificial. And there's no way you can add intelligence and artificial in the same statement. There's no way. If something is artificial, there can't be intelligence in it. That's my perspective. I'm politically challenged. And the fact that it requires human intervention to exist, so it finds its intelligence in what we do as people. You sometimes see posts on LinkedIn where you're asked to comment and it's AI driven, but we know that if you go on ChatGPT and you go put a question, depending on what is there already, it will find its intelligence in that. So all I'm saying, the risk comes in when we are too dependent on it to do things that we can do. We must still keep our independence. I also wrote an article yesterday in my newsletter where I said that don't develop this reliance on it. I've seen scary things. I promise you. I've seen people they would put a question around a typical example in South Africa. You're looking for a job, and then they ask you for a motivational letter. Now, how can I ask a machine to motivate who I am? That's for me is worrying, you know. So, and what it does is we almost sound the same because there's only so much that it can give you. So,
Sure.
everybody, I'm gonna come for this podcast. We have AI inspired images. And it's for me, it's almost like it's robbing the world of its beauty, which is who we are. And um, but it does have its place. It does create efficiencies, but it can never be above what we can do as humans. That's what I believe. Its existence comes from human beings. It didn't just come on its own. So we can't give it so much authority and power that all of a sudden now everything. I mean, I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day by some AI gentleman. It was frightening. This recommendations that he made and discoveries that he found, and everybody was buying that. And when I looked at everything, it is things that we are supposed to be doing, and it's not things that are manual intensive or hard to do, but it's creating this reliance on its intelligence, which the intelligence only comes because there's human intelligence behind it. Then it derives its intelligence. So, from a CX perspective, we're dealing with humans, we're dealing with customers. There's no
Hmm.
way that we can outsource that responsibility to AI, but we can bring AI on board, to make that experience better. But we
Hmm.
mustn't get to a point where we've outsourced that entire responsibility onto AI. There it becomes a problem because we can still do so many things without the help of AI. Somebody asked me the other day, Mandisa, I'm just trying to find my voice. I want to start writing blogs. What's your perspective on ChatGPT? I said to her,
Hmm.
if you're doing blogs, your voice is the best thing that you have. Give the
Sure.
world the rawness of your voice because there are emotions that can't come from ChatGPT, from AI. It can
Yeah.
try and create models that have vitiligo. It can create black models and all that stuff. But there's still that rawness that is missing when watching. I mean, I saw images recently of models that had vitiligo. And the way in which the white marks show on that, it's not how vitiligo develops. I mean, I've
Hmm.
got this for the last, 5 years. And the pattern was really not doing justice to vitiligo. You could see that it was created, it's not really. But when you put a
Sure.
model like Mandisa and that AI inspired model, you can see the difference. And you appreciate Mandisa more than the AI inspired model. So that's the heart of my strong opinions about AI that it can't come and take away the humanity and the emotions that can only come from these kind of conversations. Imagine if you had an AI inspired podcast.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just my
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, I think life goes full circle from a time where, all interactions were human to a time where it is largely becoming robotic and automated. There's no denying the fact that artificial intelligence is here to stay, to give scale and speed to, computing
Yes.
and large scale insights and personalization and conversations and all of that great, but I think more and more businesses are realizing that you need the human aspect back, and then actually that brings in what you and I bring to the table, which is really the human aspect of interacting with consumers. And
I mean,
in
I actually saw, sorry to cut, I saw an ad. It was an article where it said that most companies are struggling to find employees with AI skills.
hmm,
So the question is, not the question, my point is, if there's education about HR, then we'll
hmm,
be responsible in our usage of HR. But the education is not there. At the time when COVID started, there was this massive gush, and everybody
hmm,
wanted to jump on the bandwagon. But
hmm,
right now, we can now stop and say, how do we educate for responsible usage of AI? And what does AI look like for financial services? What does it look like for the banking sector? What does it look like for the retail sector? It's different. And those are the kind of chats we need to have now, seeing that it's here to stay. How do we then start educating?
Yeah, yeah. So I think customers are now saying that I don't want to chat with bots anymore. I actually want to talk to a
I don't.
human. So
I
yeah, so I
don't.
think it's about striking the right balance and knowing where to deploy AI and where to really bring
Mm,
in the human touch. I think that is where the real leverage lies. Interesting conversation, but I think we'll kind of leave it here for now.
yeah.
And I think I'm going to thank you a lot for your time and interesting inputs. I'm sure our listeners will find it immensely valuable, especially your insights with respect to culture and change management. Everything that you've said is actually so pervasive across categories. It's not about being able to do it in one place and not in another. All of these learnings
Yes.
are about human behavior and can go across all sorts of functions, businesses. That's hopefully very helpful for everyone. So thanks so much for your time. Any ending remarks before we close for today?
No, I think I've said a lot. I think I've said
Yeah,
a
sure,
lot.
sure.
I think the one thing I'm advocating for, it's something I wrote in my article yesterday, and I'm not in any way trying to sell the article or the newsletter to your audience, is that we need to prioritize fresh ways of thinking. I think it's easy to follow everybody and to do what everybody's doing, but there's nothing wrong with being different. And that's where thought leadership comes from, being able to use critical thinking about certain things and not just saying everybody's doing like you do it, but critically think about things, and being able to put your thoughts together, apply your experiences, and be able to come with a different perspective. We can do that. But what you find is that there's this reliance on something else or someone else thinking for me. And I'm not against teaching and following those seasoned leaders, but also be able to find your voice and just always think of fresh ways to look at things and think critically about things. I think that's impossible, especially as a CX leader. We
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
be fresh in our thinking. We need to apply for leadership and partner with companies with our thoughts. So I always say I'm a thought partner. So I partner with brands with my thinking, and that's been very successful in saying that I'm here to partner with you in our thinking.
On that note, on having a voice and speaking your voice, thank you so much once again.
Thank
And
you for having me. Thank you for having me.
pleasure, pleasure. And thanks to all of our guests for today's episode. I hope you enjoy it. And thanks for joining us and listening in if you are doing so. We hope you've gained some valuable insights to enhance your skills in managing your own customers. Remember, your business success depends on it. If you've enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a review, share it with your network, and we look forward to see you again in a fortnight. Thank you, and bye bye.